Officers encountered rifle fire. Officer down.
An officer down.
8 cars in the long gun.
A 26-year-old woman shot dead by police.
Is the alert able to talk to you?
No, free.
Her name, Breonna Taylor. So what happened?
The story of Breonna Taylor begins long 5th, 1993, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, to Tamika Palmer and Everett Taylor. From the very beginning, her mother adored her. Tamika often said that Breonna wasn't just her child, but her companion, her little shadow, someone she carried everywhere. She named her daughter Breonna because she wanted something soft and beautiful and gave her the middle name Shaquille to honor a relative. Her father Everett struggled with the law. He spent stretches of Breonna's childhood incarcerated, but he still held a place in her heart. The absence of a consistent father figure only deepened her bond with her mother, who became her anchor. When Breonna was still young, the family relocated to Louisville, Kentucky, where Tamika believed they could build a steadier life. Louisville in the 1990s was a city straddling two identities: the proud Southern traditions of Kentucky and the gritty realities of urban America. Its neighborhoods were filled with hard-working families like the Palmers, trying to give their children opportunities they hadn't had. Breonna grew up surrounded by cousins, aunts, uncles, and friends who became extended family. It was a world where community mattered, where church services, cookouts, and basketball courts shaped the rhythm of youth. As a little girl, Breonna was joyful and bright. She loved to laugh, loved to dress up, loved to pose for pictures with wide, mischievous smiles. Even then, she radiated an openness that drew people in. Teachers noted how she seemed to care about others as much as she cared about herself. If a classmate was left out, Breonna included them. If someone was sad, she would offer comfort. These instincts of empathy were not forced. They were natural, part of who she was. At home, she was affectionate and playful. Tamika remembered how Breonna would curl up beside her to watch TV, or how she would insist on helping with chores just to be near her. There was a deep bond between them, a relationship that blurred the line between mother and best friend. They teased each other, shared secrets, argued like sisters, but always circled back to love. It'd be why the time Breonna reached Western High School in Louisville, she was known as a girl with a big personality and a big heart. Friends described her as the glue of the group, the one who organized outings, who remembered birthdays, who always knew the right thing to say when someone was struggling. She wasn't the loudest, but she had a way of being present, of making people feel safe in her company. Breonna was also ambitious. She dreamed of making a difference, and from early on she leaned toward healthcare. She admired nurses and paramedics, impressed by the way they stepped into crises and brought calm. She talked about working in hospitals, about wanting to help people feel okay when everything is scary. For a teenager, it was a strikingly clear sense of purpose. She wasn't without struggles. Like many young Black women in America, Breonna faced the pressures of systemic inequality, the weight of stereotypes, and the daily grind of proving herself. She worked part-time jobs to help support herself and her family, but she carried herself with resilience. She was known for dressing with flair, stylish but approachable, and for her love of selfies and photos, often accompanied by playful captions. She had a humor that could cut through tension, a laugh that friends described as contagious. After graduating in 2011, Breonna set her sights firmly on healthcare. She enrolled in college courses, studying nursing and healthcare administration, while also pursuing certifications to work in the medical field. She became an EMT for Louisville Metro EMS, a demanding role that thrust her into emergencies daily. The work was exhausting, long nights, unpredictable calls, low pay, but Breonna thrived in it. She was the kind of EMT patients remembered because she held their hand, spoke to them softly, and treated them with dignity even in chaos. Colleagues admired her dedication. One coworker recalled, Breonna had this calm way about her. No matter how crazy things got, she made people feel like they weren't alone. That gift of steadiness was invaluable in a job where panic often reigned. Yet being an EMT was only a step. Breonna dreamed of becoming a full-time nurse, of building a career in critical care. She wanted to specialize in working with patients in their most vulnerable moments: intensive care, emergency wards, neonatal units. She also dreamed of owning a home, of creating stability, of building a family. She told her mother often, "One day, I'll have a big house, and you'll have your own room in it." Outside of work and school, Breonna lived with vibrancy. She loved music, from hip-hop to R&B, and she loved to dance. She was active on social media, posting snapshots of her life, celebrations with friends, affectionate tributes to her loved ones. She was a young woman fully engaged with the world, carving out joy even amid the pressures of adulthood. Her relationship with Kenneth Walker was central to her happiness. Kenneth, a soft-spoken man with dreams of his own, had known Breonna for years before their friendship deepened into love. By 2020, they were inseparable. They lived together in her apartment on Springfield Drive, shared meals, binge-watched shows, and spoke often of the future. They laughed easily, supported each other's ambitions, and built the kind of bond rooted in both romance and friendship. Breonna doted on Kenneth. She teased him, celebrated him, and spoke of him to friends as her partner in every sense. Kenneth admired Breonna's determination, her ability to lift people around her, and her infectious spirit. To him, she wasn't just a girlfriend. She was the person he envisioned spending his life with. By early 2020, Breonna Taylor was 26 years old, standing at the threshold of a life she had worked tirelessly to build. She was working in healthcare, saving money, planning to return to nursing school, building a home with Kenneth, and nurturing dreams of family and stability. She was beloved by her friends, cherished by her mother, admired by colleagues, and held close by her partner. She was a young woman full of promise, grounded in compassion, and driven by ambition. Her story should have continued along that path of service, love, and growth, but history intervened. In March of 2020, as the world around her shifted under the weight of a global. The start of 2020, Louisville, Kentucky, was a city caught between identities. With a population just shy of 620,000, it was large enough to feel like a metropolis but small enough to maintain the rhythms of southern neighborhoods where everyone seemed to know one another. Its reputation was mixed, famous for bourbon, horse racing, and basketball, but also shadowed by poverty, racial inequality, and deep-seated mistrust between many black residents and the police. In March of that year, the entire nation was on the brink of an upheaval no one had yet fully grasped. The first COVID-19 cases had been confirmed in Kentucky. Businesses began to talk of shutdowns. Hospitals braced for impact. For Breonna Taylor, who worked in healthcare, the virus was a new and terrifying storm on the horizon. But her focus remained the same: her patients, her career, her family, her future with Kenneth Walker. While Breonna lived her life with optimism, in another part of the city, detectives in the Louisville Metro Police Department's Criminal Interdiction Division were pursuing a drug investigation that would, in time, intersect fatally with her world. The target of the investigation was Jamarcus Glover, a 30-year-old man with a history of drug trafficking in Louisville. Detectives believed Glover was running an operation that distributed crack cocaine and other narcotics out of a trap house on Elliott Avenue, a low-income neighborhood west of downtown. Surveillance teams watched as men came and went. Informants told of cash exchanges and stashes of drugs. Jamarcus Glover was more than just another name on a case file. He was someone Breonna Taylor had once known. Years earlier, Breonna and Jamarcus had dated briefly. Though the relationship had ended, they had remained on occasional speaking terms. Glover had listed her address on official documents in the past, and in early 2020, investigators claimed he continued to use it for mail or packages. Whether Breonna was aware or complicit was disputed from the beginning. To her family and friends, she was far removed from his world, focused entirely on her own life with Kenneth Walker. But to the police, those past ties painted her Springfield Drive apartment as a potential secondary site connected to the investigation. In January and February 2020, detectives conducted surveillance on Glover and his associates. They tailed him to different houses. They listened to wiretaps. They noted that he occasionally visited Breonna's apartment. Some believed he was still receiving packages there. One detective claimed to have seen him leaving her apartment with a box. To investigators building a case, these details were enough to draw lines of suspicion, but suspicion is not proof. And in the world of law enforcement, The gap between suspicion and legal action is supposed to be bridged by evidence. Whether that bridge was sturdy in this case remains one of the most contested aspects of what followed. By early March, detectives prepared a package of affidavits requesting search warrants for multiple locations tied to Jamarcus Glover and his associates. One of those locations was Breonna Taylor's apartment at 3003 Springfield Drive. The justification, as outlined in the affidavit, leaned heavily on her past connection to Glover and the claim that her apartment was used to receive packages on his behalf. The affidavit was submitted to Judge Mary Shaw, who reviewed the request. Among the warrants was one particularly controversial, a no-knock search warrant for Breonna's apartment. A no-knock warrant authorizes police to enter without announcing themselves, intended for cases where suspects might destroy evidence or pose a significant threat. The police argued that Glover and his associates were dangerous drug traffickers who might quickly dispose of narcotics. Judge Shaw signed the warrants on March 12, 2020. The approval of that single piece of paper sealed Breonna Taylor's fate. Inside the police department, plans were made for the raids. Several teams would hit different locations simultaneously on the night of March 12 into the early hours of March 13. The Elliott Avenue house, believed to be the main stash site, was considered the most dangerous and was assigned to the Special Weapons and Tactics (SWAT) unit. Breonna's apartment, by contrast, was considered a soft target. Detectives believed she lived alone and posed no serious threat. They decided it could be handled by plainclothes officers from the narcotics unit. The officers assigned to Breonna's apartment included Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly, Detective Miles Cosgrove, and Detective Brett Hankison. All three had years of experience, but also histories that would later come under scrutiny. Hankison, in particular, had faced multiple complaints of reckless behavior and excessive force in his career. As the teams prepared, no one seemed to pause to ask the most crucial questions. Was the evidence truly strong enough to justify this raid? Was Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old EMT with no criminal record, truly a threat? And was a no-knock entry into her apartment in the middle of the night really necessary? The paperwork had been signed, the plans laid, and the clock ticked toward midnight. For Breonna Taylor, March 12th was an ordinary Thursday. She worked her shift, texted friends, and came home to the Springfield Drive apartment she shared with Kenneth Walker. They ate dinner, talked about their plans, and went to bed. Breonna drifted to sleep with the comforting knowledge that she was loved and safe in her own home. She had no idea that across town, officers were gearing up with bulletproof vests, guns, and a warrant that bore her address. No idea that within hours, her name would be written into history not as the healer she dreamed of becoming, but as the victim of a raid that would echo around the world. Friday, March 13th, 2020, was supposed to be just another night for Breonna Taylor. The young EMT had worked her shifts, tended to her responsibilities, and returned home to her apartment on Springfield Drive. The pandemic was beginning to stir. Whispers across Kentucky, a storm that would soon consume hospitals and frontline workers like Breonna. But that evening, her focus was not on the virus, nor on the city's troubles, but on something much simpler: being home with Kenneth Walker. Kenneth, her boyfriend, was with her that night. Their relationship had matured into a deep partnership, the kind that drew strength from years of knowing each other. They ate together, lounged on the couch, and watched television, laughing at small jokes, finding comfort in each other's presence. Breonna, always the one who filled a room with warmth, teased Kenneth as he scrolled on his phone, then settled into his arms as the night stretched on. At around midnight, the two went to bed. It was an ordinary, quiet night. The apartment was dim, the neighborhood silent except for the occasional hum of cars on the nearby road. Breonna slipped into sleep beside Kenneth, trusting that her home was her sanctuary. But outside, in parking lots and staging areas across Louisville, police officers were gathering. The narcotics unit, armed with freshly signed warrants, had a list of addresses to hit. The main target, Jamarcus Glover's suspected stash house on Elliott Avenue, was assigned to SWAT. Breonna's apartment, labeled a secondary site, was considered easier. The officers told themselves it was routine, just another piece of a larger operation. By 12:30 a.m., unmarked cars rolled quietly towards Springfield Drive. Inside were Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly, Detective Brett Hankison, and Detective Miles Cosgrove, along with several others. They wore plain clothes, but carried tactical vests and guns. The warrant they held in their hands bore Breonna Taylor's name and address. Accounts differ on whether the officers planned to execute the warrant, as a no-knock entry, or whether they were instructed to announce themselves. Officially, they later claimed they knocked and identified themselves as police. Kenneth and Breonna's neighbors, however, would testify that they heard pounding but no announcement of who it was. To Kenneth, suddenly awakened by the sound of heavy banging at the door, it felt like an invasion. Inside the apartment, Breonna and Kenneth stirred from sleep, startled. The banging grew louder, more insistent. Kenneth, a licensed gun owner, grabbed his firearm. He later explained that he believed it was a break-in, perhaps an ex-boyfriend of Breonna's or a stranger trying to force entry. Breonna, confused and frightened, called out, "Who is it?" There was no answer that they could hear. The door shuddered under the weight of a battering ram at 12:40 a.m. The door burst open. In that split second of chaos, dark apartment, unknown intruders, Kenneth fired a single shot from his pistol. The bullet struck Sergeant Mattingly in the leg, tearing through tissue and muscle. Mattingly screamed and fell back. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Officers opened fire into the apartment, a hail of bullets slicing through walls, furniture, and flesh. At least 32 rounds were discharged in the space of seconds. Bullets ripped into the hallway, the kitchen, the bedroom. Some tore through neighboring apartments, leaving holes in walls where children slept. Breonna Taylor was struck multiple times. One bullet entered her chest. She stumbled, collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Kenneth screamed her name, trying to reach her, but the gunfire body bleeding out from fatal wounds. Kenneth dropped his gun, frantic, shouting that someone help her, that his girlfriend had been shot, but help did not come. Officers dragged Kenneth outside, arresting him, accusing him of attempted murder for the shot that hit Mattingly. In the chaos, Breonna remained inside, still alive for a short while, but receiving no immediate medical attention. Minutes passed, precious minutes in which she might have been saved. Instead, she slipped away, her life extinguished in the very home where she had felt safe hours earlier. Neighbors emerged from their apartments, terrified, confused, asking what had happened. Some screamed at officers, insisting they had never heard anyone announce themselves as police. Others stood silently, watching as Kenneth was hauled away in handcuffs, shouting, "You didn't say who you were. You didn't say who you were." Inside, Breonna Taylor lay still. A 26-year-old EMT, a woman who had dedicated her life to helping others, now left without help herself. The raid that night yielded no drugs, no packages, no evidence of trafficking from Breonna's apartment. The supposed connection to Jamarcus Glover proved tenuous at best. Yet the cost was catastrophic. A young woman's life lost, a family shattered, a community plunged into grief, lifeless. As investigators began documenting the carnage, police statements in those initial hours painted a very different picture. Officers claimed they had knocked, announced themselves as police, and only forced entry when there was no response. They insisted that Kenneth Walker had fired first and that they had no choice but to return fire. They described Breonna as caught in the crossfire, though to her family, that phrasing was a cruel distortion. She had been at home, asleep, unarmed, and innocent. The contradictions began almost immediately. Kenneth told anyone who would listen that neither he nor Breonna had heard officers announce themselves. Neighbors corroborated his account. They heard pounding, but no clear identification. One neighbor initially told investigators they thought they heard police, but later retracted, saying they weren't sure. Dozens of others said there had been no announcement. The truth of those seconds would become one of the most disputed aspects of the case. As the sun rose on March 13th, Tamika Palmer received the call no mother should ever hear. Her daughter had been killed in her own home. Tamika rushed to the apartment complex, only to be met with walls of police tape, officers refusing to give her answers. She was told almost nothing. Her grief quickly turned into determination. She would not let Breonna's death be swept under the rug. In the days that followed, the official narrative wavered. Initial reports claimed Breonna had been injured, but Not killed, a false, demanding accountability. But as spring turned to summer, the world shifted again. In May 2020, George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, his death captured on video as a police officer knelt on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. The footage ignited a firestorm of protests across the United States and beyond. In that moment of reckoning, Breonna Taylor's name resurfaced, her story joining Floyd's and others as symbols of systemic injustice. Protesters chanted her name, held signs with her face, and demanded not only justice for her, but reforms to prevent others from suffering the same fate. At BY June, Breonna Taylor was no longer just a local story. She was a national rallying cry. Celebrities tweeted her name. Athletes wore her image on jerseys. Politicians invoked her in speeches. Across murals and placards, 3 words appeared again and again: say her name. The legal aftermath was complex, drawn out, and deeply controversial. Kenneth Walker was initially charged with attempted murder for shooting Sergeant Mattingly, the officer struck in the leg. Outrage poured in. Supporters pointed out that Kenneth had fired a single shot, legally owned his weapon, and had every reason to believe he was defending his home. Charges against him were eventually dropped, but the fact that he was ever prosecuted fueled further anger for the officers. Accountability proved elusive. Louisville Metro Police Department conducted internal reviews, but for months, none were arrested. Detective Brett Hankison was eventually fired, but not for Breonna's death, rather for recklessly firing bullets into neighboring apartments. Sergeant Mattingly and Detective Cosgrove remained on the force that in September 2020, a Kentucky grand jury indicted only Hankison, and even then, only on charges of wanton endangerment for endangering Breonna's neighbors with stray bullets. No officer was directly charged with killing Breonna Taylor. The decision sparked fresh outrage. Protesters filled the streets of Louisville and cities across the country, chanting her. In September 2020, the city of Louisville agreed to a $12 million settlement, one of the largest in its history, and pledged police reforms. Among the reforms was a ban on no-knock warrants, the very tactic that had led to Breonna's death. The settlement was significant, but to Tamika Palmer, it was not enough. No dollar amount could replace her daughter. No policy change. 1. The FBI opened a civil rights investigation. In August 2022, the U.S. Department of Justice charged 4 current and former Louisville police officers with federal crimes related to Breonna's death. The indictments accused officers of falsifying the affidavit used to obtain the search warrant, misleading the judge, and engaging in a cover-up after the shooting. For Tamika Palmer, the charges represented the first glimmer of real accountability. But the process was slow, and convictions remained uncertain. Beyond courtrooms and headlines, Breonna Taylor's story transformed American culture. Her name became a hashtag, a chant, a symbol. Murals appeared in Louisville, in New York, in Los Angeles, and across the world. In each, Breonna was depicted not as a victim, but as a vibrant young woman, smiling, radiant, alive. Protesters carried her face into streets from Chicago to Paris. The Say Her Name campaign, originally created to highlight Black women killed by police, reached global resonance through Breonna's story. That Breonna's legacy also reshaped policy. Louisville passed Breonna's law, banning no-knock warrants. Other states and cities followed with similar reforms. National conversations about policing, racial justice, and accountability deepened, though the outcomes remain contested and incomplete. For Tamika Palmer, the fight has never ended. She continues to speak out, reminding the world that her daughter was more than a headline, more than a symbol. Breonna was a daughter, a partner, a friend, a woman with dreams and a future. Every time Tamika takes the stage, her voice carries the weight of a mother's grief and the strength of a mother's determination. Breonna Taylor's name is now etched into history. It stands alongside the names of countless others lost to violence and injustice, a reminder of how fragile life can be and how urgent the demand for change remains. Her story is not just about the night of March 13, 2020. It is about the life she lived before it, full of love, ambition, and compassion, and the movement her death ignited after it. She should have been known as a nurse, a wife, a mother, a community leader. Instead, she became a symbol. And though her family would trade every mural, every chant, every reform just to have her back. The world has chosen to carry her forward as a call for justice that cannot be silenced.